Title: Indian Wells Tournament Director hails the influence of Eala and Joao Fonseca. It's fantastic. The crowd at Indian Wells had seen champions, Grand Slam winners, legends, icons of the sport. But on this particular afternoon, something felt different. The energy wasn't just about who was winning. It was about who was coming next. Because standing on those courts were two young players who weren't supposed to be the center of attention yet. Eala Joao Fonseca. Two names that, just months ago, most casual fans barely knew. But suddenly, the tennis world couldn't stop talking about them. And when the Indian Wells tournament director stepped forward and said their influence was fantastic, it sent a message across the entire tennis world. Something new was happening. Something big. And honestly, nobody expected it to happen this fast. At first, it looked like just another early round story. A few promising young players, some exciting rallies, a couple of impressive wins. But Indian Wells 2026 quickly turned into something much bigger than that. Because the atmosphere around Eala and Joao Fonseca started to change. Fans were showing up earlier to watch them warm up. Social media clips of their highlights were exploding overnight. Commentators were suddenly debating their future. And behind the scenes, even tournament officials were noticing something unusual. This wasn't just about talent. It was about impact. And that's when the real tension began. Because tennis has been searching for something for years. The next generation. The next stars who could carry the sport forward. After decades dominated by legends, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, then the rise of new champions like Alcaraz and Sinner. The question remained, who comes after them? Who captures the imagination of fans across the world? Who makes people stay up late just to watch one match? Who creates stories bigger than the game itself? And suddenly, two teenagers at Indian Wells were beginning to answer that question. Let's start with Eala, because what she's doing right now isn't just impressive. It's historic. The young Filipina has carried the hopes of an entire nation every time she steps onto the court. But at Indian Wells, the pressure felt even bigger. Because this wasn't just any tournament. Indian Wells is often called the fifth Grand Slam. The desert stage where the biggest stars shine. And yet, Eala walked onto that court with the calm of someone who had already imagined this moment. Her movement, her shot selection, her fearless attitude against higher-ranked players. It was the kind of performance that makes commentators stop mid-sentence and say, "Wait a second, this kid is different." But what happened next changed everything. Because the fans started to believe it too. During one match, the camera panned across the crowd. You could see Filipino flags waving in the stands, fans shouting her name, phones recording every point. It wasn't just support. It was a movement forming in real time. And the reaction online was immediate. Within minutes of her match highlights being posted, tennis Twitter exploded. Comments like, Eala is the future. She plays with zero fear. The Philippines finally has its superstar. And behind the scenes, even veteran analysts were starting to pay attention. Because Eala's game had evolved. Her backhand was sharper. Her court awareness more mature. Her mental strength undeniable. This wasn't just a junior champion anymore. This was someone ready to compete with the best. And suddenly, the spotlight grew even brighter. But while Eala was creating waves on one side of the tournament, something equally electric was happening on the men's side. And his name was Joao Fonseca. If you had walked around Indian Wells just a year earlier and asked fans about Joao Fonseca, most would have shrugged. Maybe a few hardcore tennis followers would recognize the name. But in 2026, that story changed overnight. Because Fonseca didn't just show up. He announced himself. The Brazilian teenager walked onto the court with a style that instantly caught attention. Explosive forehands, fearless baseline rallies, and a confidence that felt contagious. Every time he struck the ball, the sound echoed through the stadium, and the crowd could feel it. Something powerful was building. But that was just the start. Because one match turned into another. Another victory. Another upset. And suddenly, Fonseca wasn't just competing. He was taking over the conversation. Fans began comparing him to past Brazilian legends. Commentators praised his maturity, and Brazilian tennis fans, some of the most passionate in the world, began flooding social media with support. Clips of his matches were going viral across Latin America, and every highlight seemed to carry the same message. The future is here. But the real turning point came during one particular moment, a match that started like any other, but ended up changing the narrative around the entire tournament. Because halfway through the match, Fonseca produced a rally so breathtaking that the crowd actually stood up before the point was even finished. 20 shots. 25 shots. Both players refusing to back down. Then suddenly, a thunderous forehand winner down the line. The stadium erupted. Commentators shouted. And the clip spread across the internet within minutes. The reaction was immediate. Sports networks began replaying the rally. Tennis analysts broke down the shot. Fans were calling it one of the best moments of the tournament. And behind the scenes, the tournament director was watching all of it unfold. That's when the comment came. A statement that caught the attention of the entire tennis community. The Indian Wells tournament director looked at the rise of Eala and Joao Fonseca and simply said, "It's fantastic." But those two words carried a deeper meaning. Because Indian Wells has always been a place where the future of tennis reveals itself. Think about the past. Roger Federer lifted trophies here. Rafael Nadal dominated here. Carlos Alcaraz announced his arrival here. So when new stars emerge in the desert, people notice. And this time, those stars were Eala and Joao Fonseca. But the real story wasn't just about their wins. It was about their influence. Because something unexpected was happening around the tournament. You could feel it in the crowd. You could see it online. You could hear it in every conversation about tennis. Fans weren't just watching them. They were investing emotionally in their journey. Young players from the Philippines suddenly had a hero. Brazilian tennis fans felt a new surge of hope. Media outlets across Asia and South America were covering their matches. And sponsors were starting to pay attention. But with attention comes pressure. And that's when things became even more intense. Because the tennis world has seen this before. Young stars rise. Expectations explode. And suddenly the spotlight becomes overwhelming. Every shot is analyzed. Every loss questioned. Every win dissected. So the real question became, could Eala and Fonseca handle it? The answer started to appear in their reactions. Eala, after one of her biggest matches, stepped into the press conference room. Reporters asked her about the growing hype, the rising expectations, the millions of people watching her journey. And she smiled. Calm. Focused. Then she said something simple. Something powerful. She said she was just grateful to represent her country. And that moment resonated with fans. Because behind the rising star was a young athlete carrying the pride of the Philippines. A nation that had waited decades for a tennis breakthrough. Meanwhile, Joao Fonseca faced his own wave of attention. Brazilian media followed his every move. Fans asked if he could become the country's next global tennis icon. And the pressure was real. But instead of backing down, Fonseca leaned into the moment. He played with even more intensity, even more passion, as if the energy from the fans was fueling him. And that's when the real narrative started to form. This wasn't just about two players. It was about two regions of the world rising in tennis. Asia, South America. Two passionate fan bases. Two cultures deeply connected to sport. And now, two young athletes representing their dreams. But nobody expected what came next. Because, as the tournament progressed, the buzz around Eala and Fonseca started overshadowing even bigger names. Headlines began shifting. Articles discussed the new generation wave. Analysts debated whether these young stars could soon challenge the top rankings. And the crowds kept growing. The atmosphere around their matches became electric. Fans lining up hours early. Kids asking for autographs. Commentators raising their voices with excitement. It was the kind of momentum that sports rarely produces. And behind the scenes, tournament officials were thrilled. Because moments like this don't just create great matches. They create new eras, new stories, new heroes. The Indian Wells director later explained why seeing Eala and Fonseca rise was so exciting. Because tournaments need fresh energy, new faces, new narratives that bring fans into the sport. And watching these two young players inspire crowds, he described it as fantastic. But the biggest impact might still be ahead. Because tennis history shows something interesting. When young stars create buzz early, their journey becomes something fans follow for years. Think of Nadal at Roland Garros. Think of Serena Williams' early breakthroughs. Think of Alcaraz's electrifying crowds. And now, Eala and Joao Fonseca are stepping onto that same path. A path filled with expectations, opportunities, and challenges. But here's what makes their stories so powerful. They're not just playing for trophies. They're playing for something bigger. Representation, hope, inspiration. For millions of fans who rarely saw themselves represented in tennis before. And if Indian Wells was the beginning, then the next chapters could be even bigger. Grand Slam breakthroughs, historic wins, rivalries that define a generation. Because sometimes, in sports, you can feel the moment when the future arrives. And, in the California desert, under the bright lights of Indian Wells, that moment may have just happened. Two names. Eala, Joao Fonseca. Remember them, because if this tournament proved anything, it's that the next era of tennis might already be here. And honestly, the world is just starting to notice.